I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Andrew Price.
And I'm Jason Pargin.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
the Satanic Panic.
What was the Satanic Panic? Well, it was a moral panic predominantly occurring in North America throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. The general public lost their shit over the belief that Satan worshippers, from high school teachers to politicians, were members of a cult that would abduct, sexually abuse, and or sacrifice children, which of course was... bullshit.
Act 1. Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight? Beelzebub, Lucifer, old goat legs. For as long as there have been Abrahamic religions, there's been some depiction of an adversary to God. The devil exists to tempt humanity into sinning, and if you kill someone or illegally download a movie, you'll wind up going straight to hell to be tortured by him for all of eternity. But are Satan and God really battling it out in the sky like Goku and Frieza? Look, this is a pop culture podcast. We're not going to litigate whether God exists, but regardless, Satan has been used as an almighty figurehead throughout history to basically scare people into doing what others want them to do. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that people want Satan, or at least some kind of evil manifestation, to be real and punish those following Satan's orders. Moral panics have cropped up throughout history, from the blood libel against Jews in Apion in the 30s CE to the Salem witch trials. People love having an other that can be accused of doing evil shit even if there's literally zero proof. You can even argue that in the current American political climate, we're in the midst of yet another moral panic. But the one we're here to talk about today is the one many of us grew up in. It's the one where our parents made us feel bad for listening to heavy metal music or playing Dungeons and Dragons. We're talking of the Satanic Panic in the US throughout the 1980s. So, Mr. Pargin, first of all, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. But also, you know, in addition to just being a huge fan of your work, one big reason why I wanted you to be on this episode is because we're friends on TikTok and we've talked a little bit back and forth. And I knew that I at some point wanted to get you on the show, but I didn't want to like underutilize you or get you onto an episode where we would just be talking about some random thing that wasn't super relevant to you. And so it took a little while to find the perfect topic. And I kind of think that we did here because number one, you've made a couple of videos talking about this, but also I feel like this subject matter kind of runs through the veins of a lot of your writing. And it feels like it has some kind of like personal relevance to you. So that being said, we did an episode previously about Ray Buckey, who was a guy who was caught up in the Satanic Panic thing and ended up going to prison for several years for crimes that he didn't commit. And we talked about our experience with like the tail end of the Satanic Panic because we both grew up in the late 80s and the early 90s, and there was a little bit of that stuff still around. But as you've told me, you were like in the thick of it. So that all being said, what was your experience with the Satanic Panic? Like, what was it like actually living directly during the pinnacle of this time?
Okay, so immediately we're going to disappoint the listeners, I think, because you said I was right in the thick of it, and it really does make it sound like I was one of the Satan worshipers who was sacrificing.
Oh, you weren't?
The
you
children.
weren't?
I was not. I misled you just to get on the podcast.
What the hell?
I was born in 1975. I'm one of the oldest people in the world.
The math checks out.
I would have been 10 years old, right? And I'd say 1985 was probably the apex of all this stuff. This is when I think the media was being the most credulous about it, when it was really starting to become mainstream. So I was old enough to be told about this stuff at church and hear about it in Sunday school and hear about it in the sermons, but too young to know what a moral panic looked like. I didn't have any of that context to know that, oh, these are urban legends that I'm hearing. This is not a real thing that has occurred. So I was right at the sweet spot where I just thought this was reality. I didn't have any reason to doubt it. And then as I got old enough into, my teen years, was right at the same time that the country was starting to realize, oh, this is nonsense. So I'm not saying that I caused the country to realize it was nonsense. I'm saying that my realization occurred, I think, at the same time the culture as a whole kind of came around.
I mean, I think you probably are not giving yourself enough credit. Like, do you think maybe your cultural awakening possibly had some kind of larger macro effect on the public consciousness?
Yeah, because, well, when I was 12 years old, I had 3 million followers on social media back in 1980.
Yeah,
of course.
1987.
But also,
I had invented my own social network because the technology did not yet exist. But no, this is what's the opposite of nostalgia? Is there a word for that?
Yeah.
Well, I think nostalgia is the opposite of nostalgia, because like nostalgia originally was supposed to be like, I think it translates to like a painful wound or something like that. Like it's supposed to be you like having a bittersweet like emotional reaction to something that's happened to you. So I think it's just nostalgia.
I heard Don Draper say that in an episode of Mad Men. But yeah, this was a period of my life when, I don't know, I don't want to make it sound, I wasn't from like an abusive cult or anything like that. I don't want to play up the hardship of my youth, but I did go to a Pentecostal church, and I did, as a child, I believed what everybody in that church believed, that very, very soon Christ was going to return and cast everyone but us, a few dozen people, into hell, and that I would not grow up to see the future. I thought, oh no, Jesus will return long before I'll be an adult. I didn't think I would grow up. And now looking back, I don't know. It's weird because it's hard to say how much the people in that church believed it. Like if we had been in the middle of one of the sermons and then Jesus did appear in the sky, I think most of the people in the room would have been like, whoa, I actually did not think that was going to happen. I thought that was just a thing we were all saying. But I don't know. And then when I became a teenager, went to high school and it made more friends outside of the church. I just, was vaguely ashamed of all of it. But man, while this stuff was going on, like all of these things we're about to discuss, all of these controversies that came up, I was there in real time and thought I was living in a world full of secret satanic cults that abducted babies by the dozen and sacrificed them.
I'm curious about because I feel like a lot of your work, the novels that you've written, and even your work at Cracked, like I feel like saying deconstruction maybe is too overt, but there is a thread, right, of like questioning power. Even just like the naming conventions of a lot of your novels are like quote unquote not the way you're supposed to name a novel. And do you get what I'm asking? Like, can you draw a straight parallel line from this deconstruction to the sense of humor and the sense of kind of willful bucking of trends and or hagiography that your work often works in?
Probably, because I don't know, I was not rebellious as a teenager, and I never became like the angry internet atheist. I never resented being brought up in the church. I still don't. I don't. A lot of it was clearly very useful to a lot of the people around me. When you're in a congregation like that, you're surrounded by people coming up every Sunday and saying, my life had been lost to alcohol and drugs, and then I joined the church and this has saved my life. And it's like that was the thing that got them. It was something that they could grab onto, and I wouldn't take that away from them. But this part of it that we're about to discuss, this is the one part that I do kind of resent, because so much of what would be taught from the pulpit was urban legend stuff. Like the pastor would be, I don't know how churchy your guys' upbringings were, but they would go from talking about one of the 20 parts of the Bible that every sermon revolves around, because there's just these same parts that they will preach on, and then would shift right into talking about, well, I just saw on the news that some teenagers were playing with the Ouija board, and the next morning their parents found them all dead. And nobody knows what. They clearly summoned something, and I'm sitting there in the pew thinking, wow, why wasn't that on the news? And I guess today you could just Google that and find out that it didn't happen, but they would do this. They would weave these urban legends just right into the sermon and just preach it right along all of this stuff. And that's why I think a lot of people found it so easy to believe some of the examples you're going to raise here, that it's like, well, yeah, this is what I'm hearing on Sunday.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that in the Ray Bucky episode, this idea that like the gravity of those things is much more defining to a child as opposed to an adult, because, whatever, I don't know how I would have fed into those things if I was an adult back in the 80s or 90s, but as an adult now, I see these things and I'm just like, number one, I mean, like you said, you can't account for the difference in having access to the internet versus not or whatever. But as an adult, I hear stories like that and I'm like, first of all, that sounds like total bullshit. And second of all, I can just go find out if that's true right now. But as a kid, the push and pull of those narratives is like very strong. And I don't know. I don't want to like put words in your mouth about why you resented that. But for me, the resentment comes from the fact that like there were a lot of fears and anxieties and existential crises, like you were talking about, not thinking you were ever going to make it to adulthood, that were instilled in us by adults who were just telling us all this bullshit that was like, it was to craft a narrative for a community of people, which, like you said, may have been helpful to them, but to a child, you were just like scaring the shit out of us. And that's the thing that I resent about it, was this idea of like just flippantly just like traumatizing children with these insane stories.
Yeah, I remember being a kid and reading Billy Graham. Like this is so weird, but my dad gave me Billy Graham's biography, and in that, there's a story that he tells where he got shot in the leg by buckshot and was bleeding out and like had a near-death experience ostensibly. And the way he described it is he had a near-death experience because he was bleeding out. They were taking him to the hospital with his buckshot in his leg, and he quote-unquote saw hell and then came back and was like, I have to save people from going there. And do I think that that's a kayfabed Circus Barker persona story that he used during his lifetime to attempt to bilk money out of people through the mechanic of tithing? 100%. But when I was 9, that shit was real to me. I was like, my God, this guy saw hell. Yeah. It's real. Like, we're gonna go there. We have to like be better. And it really fucked me up for a long time.
Yeah. Till
last week. Yeah. Like last week, fully. Yeah.
But this is one reason why when I hear people talk about the modern plague of misinformation and how the internet is just a vector for, misinformation, man, compared to the way it was when I was a kid, the things the average person believed back then, as compared to now, I'm sorry, it's always been this. You could have conversations at a diner about a guy that saw Bigfoot in the woods by our house when he was out hunting, and another guy talking about the Bermuda Triangle, and he knows a guy whose sailboat, he went into the Bermuda Triangle and he reappeared on the opposite side of the planet. Like, and you couldn't look stuff up, and people just walked around with that in their heads all the time. So I don't know. I kind of think it's always been like this. I think humans as animals never have a very accurate picture of reality in their brains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I the funny thing is, I'm definitely going to ask you a little bit more about that subject a little bit later as we go through this, because I definitely want to talk, because there's a thing I've seen you talk about a lot, this idea of like the cyclical nature of culture and how these things repeat themselves, and you don't start to get a sense of it until you've seen enough time to where you start to see where the Pac-Man screen goes to the other side. So where did this fear of the devil come from? It can be traced back to the 1980 book Michelle Remembers, written by psychiatrist Lawrence Pasder and his patient, who eventually became his wife, Michelle Smith. And
dude, I'm sorry, but Lawrence Pasder looks like the type of guy that would be a middling character actor in a bunch of like full moon directed VHS horror movies. Like that guy, That guy wants to be a leading man, but he's like always like the grumpy school professor.
Yeah,
or whatever.
He's the dad or the teacher.
Yeah.
in several straight to VHS horror
Yeah,
movies.
100%. Like that guy, he looked at what's the pedophile guy from fucking Ferris Bueller's Day Off?
Oh, Joseph
Yeah, whatever that
Smith?
kid. Yeah, whatever that guy. Whatever that
Jeffrey
guy.
Jones.
Jeffrey Jones.
Joseph Smith is the Mormon guy.
He looked at that guy and was like, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can do this.
And he pulled it off. Michelle had seen Lawrence for therapy sessions going back to 1973, and in 1976, they began ramping up sessions after Michelle was suffering from depression following a miscarriage. Michelle believed there was something she needed to tell Lawrence, but just couldn't remember what it was. At this point, Lawrence engaged in hypnosis to recover the lost memories. Michelle was then able to tell him that when she was 5 years old, her mother sold her off to a satanic cult in Victoria, Canada, where she suffered physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. She made wild claims about witnessing animal and human sacrifice, being forced to eat feces, and engaging in a ritual lasting 81 days called Feast of the Beast, where Satan appeared to the cult members and spoke using Dr. Seuss-like rhymes before the Virgin Mary and the Archangel Michael appeared to stop him. Michelle Remembers was an instant hit. How could it not be? It marketed itself as being based on true events, but as soon as it came out, it faced scrutiny. There was zero evidence that what Michelle remembered was actually true. For starters, Michelle mentioned getting scars from her time with the cult, but there was nothing of the sort on her body. She hand-waved this away by saying that her scars were eventually healed by the Virgin Mary. And Lawrence asserted everything in the book came at the hands of the Church of Satan, which drew ire from the actual Church of Satan founder Anton LaVey, who sued him for libel. Lawrence would eventually retract that accusation. There's also the fact that Michelle's father, Jack Proby, could refute everything in the book, which also doesn't mention anything about Michelle's two sisters. There was also the inherent ethical quandary of Lawrence and Michelle divorcing their previous spouses and marrying one another. But none of that mattered. Michelle Remembers was basically the Blair Witch Project, a terrifying story that tried to pass itself off as real even though 10 seconds of research would prove that it was all bupkis. Lawrence became a prominent figure in the new field of satanic ritual abuse. He gave lectures, he was interviewed by 2020, and by the end of the decade, he'd act as a consultant for more than 1,000 abuse cases. During his time, hundreds of other people came forward with their own accounts of remembering suffering abuse from satanic sources.
The part of this that I think if you weren't there at the time that you're not going to get is how credulous the mainstream was about this. Because I think if you're reading this now or listening to this now, you're comparing this to something like QAnon, something that started on the internet and started on 4chan. There's always a bunch of weirdos out there and there's some fringe talk radio guy talking it up. And this was not like that. This was actual police departments. These were actual medical professionals. These were actual mental health professionals. This guy was a psychiatrist. Like, these are licensed people. The infrastructure of law enforcement, mental health, they were all taking this seriously as a thing that occurred. Now, to make something clear, they were not all necessarily saying that anything supernatural was happening. That's what the church was saying. But among law enforcement, it wasn't, oh my gosh, we got to look out. They may summon Satan and we'll have to go arrest Satan. It's that these teenagers were believing it and sacrificing babies and animals because they believed it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's an important distinction. If you were just a normal person, not like if you're picturing just a rabid, zealous fundamentalist believing this stuff, if you're just a normal housewife in 1985, there was every reason to believe this was true. Again, not that demons were possessing people necessarily. You didn't have to believe that part, but that you could not let your kids go out at night or else they could be snatched up by devil worshippers and sacrificed as part of a ritual, because you were hearing this from trustworthy people.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a term, we use this term a lot on the show called context laundering. We actually, you don't have any reason to know this, but we did a 12-hour series on QAnon that was basically like, as far as I know, the world's only complete mapping of every event that happened from the first QAnon message in 2017, October 28th, I think, until the January 6th riot that kind of ended that movement, like in its proper form. And in that, we discussed this idea of context laundering, this idea that like, the tenets of QAnon, a lot of the like stuff that starts at the 4chan message board, like True Believer, or even, in some cases like people who are just joking around level, has a lot of weird supernatural stuff and a lot of like things that if the common person were to hear that part of it, they'd be like, oh, this is insane. This is all is made up. But then the more normal, believable aspects of it get broken out into the larger internet, but that silly sort of supernatural stuff stays at the ground level. And then that next tier is the more believable stuff that is, the type of thing that people on, would believe when they look at like Facebook memes or something like that. And then from that, it gets curated down to like the one or two like really crux ideas of the movement. This could actually realistically happen. And then that stuff is what makes it onto the mainstream media and gets talked about in the news and gets talked about by politicians. And if anybody along that like tier were to drill down and like read more of the details that were kind of left behind when it made it to them, they would be like, oh, this is nonsense. There's no like satanic rituals where people are like sacrificing children to demons. Like that's insane. But that stuff gets like kept in its little zone where it's effective, and then it gets shielded from the outer cone of people. And it's interesting how that's just the playbook all the time. Like everything that you just described is just exactly that. Like, as you said, there were people who were talking about, like, we talked about this in the Ray Bucky episode. Whenever these kids were accusing this guy of having molested them, they were talking about the teachers flying around on brooms like witches. Mm-hmm. And there were certain people who were just like, oh shit, like the teachers are witches. And then the next piece of information, the next tier of information that jumps up, it sands off some of that silly stuff, and then it's just like, oh no, these teachers molested these children, which is a thing that really happens. And in that way, they're able to keep all of these narratives compartmentalized and all these different groups of people buying into it for their own various reasons. And I just find it very fascinating. I'm very like validated by you from your firsthand experience of like having lived through this one slice of culture, like just repeating those things that we talked a lot about in the QAnon episode. And it's just like, yeah, it's always been like this. This is how human behavior works. This is how like people who want to serve a particular narrative, like execute their playbook. It's very fascinating.
There's actually a lot of aspects of culture that work like that too. That's not even necessarily conspiracy stuff. Like a lot of people don't think that there's any religious aspect to yoga. They think it's just a type of stretching. It's like, well, no, it's a whole belief system. And same thing with like acupuncture. It's some people are like, yeah, it's good for pain relief. It stimulates the nerve. It's like, no, this whole thing about energy points but the lore behind it is not part of what they show to newcomers. It's very common sense on the face. And I guess Scientology is the same way. Scientology always starts with, you get stressed out at work sometimes? Like, yeah, like, oh, well, come in, come talk to us. That's all this is about. Just, you're stressed out. You want a way to deal with your troubles in your life. All the stuff about Xenu, that's like 13 levels deep. They don't hit you with that on the first day. It starts out with just, well, this is stuff we can all agree with.
I kind of love it though. I'm not gonna lie. There's something about Xenu being like so far behind the curtain that it just is existentially fun to me. Like, because it gives you a sense of like, yeah, people are going to be manipulated across the board, of course. But also it's so silly that this is the way that the human mind works, that like presented enough or experiencing enough sunk cost fallacy will get you to believe anything. Even a volcano that has souls trapped in it or whatever the fuck else Scientology believes.
Well, I mean, that's the catch-22 of all this stuff. We've talked about this so many times in all of our various conspiracy episodes that, like, conceptually, I love it. Right, it's all I love every minute of it.
Yeah.
But then you get to like the real-world implications of the people that it's hurting, the way that it's
people
leading people astray, and you're just like, well, okay, fine, it's bad. Okay,
it's bad.
Okay.
But who listening to this has not looked at like Tom Cruise and his method and his career and said, I got to admit, whatever he's doing is better than what I'm doing. Like, he's the best, like
advertisement for Scientology possible, because he is like objectively maybe the best human being on the planet, like in every like metric, by every metric. So yeah, he's a pretty good advertisement.
Other than being a father.
Oh yeah,
he's kind of a shitty father.
Other than abandoning his child. Yeah. You got me there.
Yeah.
That's like a perfect example, because everything can be. Everybody who believes in something weird kind of knows how weird it is. And this is why, people that are deep into right-wing conspiracy theories, they can always launder it down to, well, surely you agree that the immigration system got overwhelmed with asylum seekers and that was just a mess. Like surely you can see that bureaucracy doesn't work. I'm like, well, yeah, it's, it was kind of a nightmare there for a while. It's like, yeah, well, let me tell you about how the Jews are secretly trying to do white genocide by pulling the levers of all of society to exterminate the white race using their puppets. And it's like, okay, but that's like several steps down. If they can just get you at that initial stage of, yeah, this is a big mess. It's like, okay, we'll just start there. And then we'll just ease you down the path. So anybody is like, well, surely you agree that children are being abused in the world. It's like, yeah, that's definitely true. Like, but okay, I don't think it's like this though.
And then inevitably it's like, oh well, then you don't think child trafficking is real or whatever.
Yeah,
like you have to be all in on the narrative, or else you are like saying the opposite.
Yeah. Do you not care about children?
But it is going to be fun though if this whole Epstein child trafficking ring is what finally brings down Trump. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna be so amped on it. I'm gonna be like, I don't know, guys, this is great. Fuck this guy.
I'm having the time of my life.
I'm having the time of my life.
Sorry to those kids, but
yeah, I'm sorry to those kids. That sucks. But like, at least it served something.
Hey, you want to hear something? When they release those files, it's going to be disappointing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's not going to be, because Jeffrey Epstein absolutely had sex with many underage women and girls. That was his whole deal. The idea that he had like a ring of powerful people that he was providing young girls to, and he had a plane especially for them to all have group sex on the plane. You're going to find the gap between the public imagination on that and the actual evidence for it. Not saying it didn't happen, but in terms of, do you have any evidence this occurred versus you just told yourself this story? You're going to be disappointed. You are. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. I mean,
it's never as exotic as what you want it to be.
Well, the thing is, and that, I mean, that's true. I agree with that just in general, but also things like that, revelations like that, they come out of nowhere. Like if we ever find out something like that, it's going to be like one day you're just like watching Farscape, and then somebody's going to walk up to you and be like, did you see that like Trump is going to prison? Like that's how it happens. It's never going to be like this long buildup where you're just like, release those files, we got to find out. It never happens that way. It's
like Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
Bill Cosby, I never heard a word about that. People claimed like, oh, that had been out there for years. I never heard that until the day it's like, oh yeah, he's assaulted.
Toast.
He's done. He's done.
Like,
he's done. Yeah.
He has?
Yeah.
That blindsided me. But no, you're exactly right. It was not a slowly building thing. It's just one day everybody agreed, oh no, he's one of our worst monsters. Like, okay.
Yeah. Back to Farscape.
Yeah. Look at these aliens.
Yeah. There were commonalities among all of these reports, and scholar Joseph Laycock pointed out how many of them had similarities to well-known films.
Is that you? Yes, That's you
yes.
Just being like, this guy's laying cock.
Yeah.
You just couldn't get through the line because
I tried to stay mature and look like an adult in front of
Joe
our guest.
Laycock over here.
Yeah, I know, right?
I tried to keep it together for our guest, but the dog in me won. There were commonalities among all these reports, and scholar Joseph Laycock pointed out how many of them have similarities to well-known films about the occult, like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen. He believed patients recalling their own trauma were really just remembering moments from these movies. But it wasn't just scary movies that primed the country to suddenly be afraid of Satan. If anything, it was a reaction to the counterculture of the 1970s. church attendance within Christianity declined, and there was a rise of other belief systems. Wicca and Scientology began catching on, and Hare Krishna populated airports. People were primed to fear cults following the Tate LaBianca murders from the Manson family in 1969. It was a pressure cooker of Christianity losing its grip on the zeitgeist, and a good old-fashioned moral panic is a great way to boost church attendance. The ideas put forth in Michelle Remembers infiltrated many authority figures. Social workers were taught about how to extract quote-unquote forgotten memories from children.
And that never went away. I bet most of the people listening to this think that there is such a thing as repressing memories due to trauma, that if you're traumatized, your brain will do like selective amnesia of the traumatic event. That's always been pseudoscience. If it happens, there's no evidence for it. And there's definitely no evidence that it can be recovered with hypnosis. You can definitely make somebody invent a memory under hypnosis. The human brain is very good at coming up with things, and you can definitely convince a child to tell you any story if they sense that it's the story you want to hear, which children want to please the adults. They don't want to be in trouble. But that's something that I think most of the people listening to this, you've heard somebody talk about, well, yeah, I repressed that memory. It was so traumatic for me. There's no evidence that's a thing. That is a lingering effect or whatever of this. I think there are mental health professionals who still believe this is a thing. That if you ever have somebody who claims they suddenly remember a crime that they had never remembered their entire life, but it suddenly came up in a dream or under hypnosis, or it suddenly came back to them, that is most likely a false memory that they made up out of whole cloth.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, even if there was some validity to it and there was the possibility of repressing memories, there's too much crossover with the ability to create false memories or for people to implant false memories that the experiment is compromised, right? Like it's too untrustworthy to really put credence into any of it, because the mind is so malleable that it's like there's no way of parsing out this thing that you genuinely believe may be a repressed memory from the very common human phenomenon of creating false memories or for getting suggested things that make you think things happened a certain way. So yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's like, it's really hard I would find it very difficult to incorporate anything that is considered a repressed memory into any kind of legitimate investigation into a crime or whatever, because it's like, you have no idea of this could be anything.
For example, one of the phenomena that came along during the same time period, the 1960s, 1970s, was UFOs. And the idea of being a UFO abduction that came about in 1961, that was due to a single case, Betty and Barney Hill. That was a recovered memory. They did not experience that and say, oh my gosh, we were just abducted by a UFO. No, they had a weird night, and then years later, under hypnosis, remembered the alien grays and the examination table. All of that stuff comes from that event. And then since then, in the 60 years since then, 60 some years, you have had thousands of alien abduction cases all around the world. And just like you said with these films like The Exorcist and The Omen, the one thing every alien abduction case has in common is that it happens in a region where they have TV and movies. So magically, only people that have access to media, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and X-Files or whatever, those cultures will suddenly have people recovering memories of having been abducted by UFOs. But if they don't have access to that media, then they will recover a memory of having been abducted by a demon or possessed by a demon or assaulted by a demon, because it's just sleep paralysis. It's that thing in the brain where you wake up partially, but you're still dreaming. That's all it is. But once it's out there in the culture, you can make yourself, and to be clear, Betty and Barney Hill, like, these people pass lie detector tests. You can hook them up to a polygraph. They think it happened to them, but it is a memory that was manufactured under hypnosis, because hypnosis is pseudoscience.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, like, I over the years, it's waned, but particularly whenever I was a teenager into my 20s, I had a really chronic issue with sleep paralysis. So
Oh, Jesus.
yeah, like almost every night I would have sleep paralysis episodes, and basically it's like you wake up but you can't move because the thing that causes your body to stop moving in your sleep, it's just like you overproduce it. So like you're awake, you're conscious, but the chemical that's causing your body to not move is still active, so you just can't move. And then for some reason it causes these like hallucinogenic aspects of it where you really think there's like a thing in the room with you, and you can kind of see it out of the corner of your eye, and you can kind of hear it, at least in your mind's eye you can kind of hear it. And it's interesting because it's freaky. I'm not gonna mince words about that. It's fucking freaky. But also, there was never a point where I was like, this is really happening. I always knew that it was some kind of, even before I learned what sleep paralysis was, because at first I had no idea what the fuck it was, and then I learned, I think a doctor told me or something. But even whenever I didn't know what it was and had never heard of sleep paralysis, there was never a point where I was like, there's a demon that visits me at night. I can't, it's so bizarre that I mean, I guess it makes sense earlier in time when people understood less about things, but even as recently as the 80s, like, really, you thought that was a real demon? Like, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I've only experienced that once, and I was shitting myself. I was in my bed in my old apartment, and there was a strange black shadow creature on the wall.
Oh, that was me.
Right, yeah, obviously. And it had like glowing white eyes, and I was 100% convinced it was real. I was like, I'm gonna die. I don't know. My whole life is a lie. Demons are real, or aliens or something. What the fuck is happening? And then my roommate at the time came home, and he slammed the front door, and it like, I don't know what, but it jogged me out of it. But I was there for what felt like hours. It was probably only a couple minutes, but it felt like hours.
Yeah, they're called hypnagogic hallucinations.
Yeah,
they're dreamlike hallucinations. What are you gonna say?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, they're dreamlike hallucinations that are like overlaid onto your actual vision.
The people who don't know, in the listenership who don't know who I am, I became known because I wrote a series of horror novels. The first one was called John Dies at the End. Well, the shadow people are the monsters in that series. And I would get messages from people and fan mail saying, I saw one. It's like, no, this is an existing thing. I did not invent the shadow people. It's the most common hallucination people have. You can recreate it in the lab. They can make a person see it. It's a weird thing where you have a part of your brain that detects when someone's in the room with you. And if it misfires, because you're not seeing a person, your brain will like map a shadow there. But it is just a neurological misfire. But on sleep paralysis, that's the most common thing they see is the shadow people. And it's usually a dark figure and then just like eyes that light up somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny that you even bring that up and say that because, in answer to the implied question that you asked earlier, we did grow up in very religious households. Me, less so my parents. It was more my grandparents that kind of like were like the matriarchal authorities over my family, and they were like super evangelical, Pentecostal Christian. And it's really funny because, I've followed your column on Cracked since like, the early days. And then, I remember I was working at Borders Books at the time, which, what was it? 2007 when John Dies at the End was first published as a book. Was it 2007?
Hardcover would have been 2009.
2009. Okay, there we go. I worked at Borders in 2009, and I remember just that book just showing up, and me being like, "Holy shit! Like, Jason Pargin wrote a book? Like, what the fuck?" At Borders, I don't know if you ever worked at a bookstore at some point in your life or whatever, but when you work at a bookstore, on your breaks, you just read books. Like, you go off and you grab a book off the shelf and you read it or whatever. And actually John Dies at the End at Borders, they would give samples away to people. Like, they would have a big stack of books, and on a first come first serve basis, you could just take the book. And the idea of it was like to have the booksellers kind of know what they were talking about certain books, so that they could be better at recommending books. Although the idea of like reading one or two books and that somehow making you better at your job is kind of ridiculous. Like, there's like thousands of books. But John Dies at the End was one of those, and I grabbed it. And I read the whole thing like on my lunch breaks over the course of like a week or whatever it was. And that specific thing, the fact that the idea that that they see, like the idea that the creatures that you see, you can only see them out of the corner of your eye. Like you can't see them directly, like that like crab monster or whatever in the cage in the very beginning of John Dies at the End, the thing that they get in the cage, whatever, it was like some kind of little monster or whatever. And they can only see it by looking out of the corner of their eye. When I read that, I specifically thought back to my childhood, because when I was a kid, that's what my grandparents would say is like, if you're ever walking around and you see somebody passing by you out of the corner of your eye, that's Satan, like checking in on you. That's what my grandparents told me when I was a kid, or my grandma specifically. She was the particularly crazier one. But she told me that. And so whenever I read John Dies at the End, I specifically was taken back to that childhood memory of my grandma traumatizing the fuck out of me.
There are specific religions and specific branches of Christianity where you can just run into Satan while walking around town doing your shopping. A lot of them don't believe that that's a thing that happens, but I think I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and the idea of like spiritual warfare, that Satan is in your life and all around you, and that he's there to possibly possessing people. We're big on, demon possession, all of that stuff. Yeah, that was, if you have that basis of belief, then all of this stuff we're describing goes down a lot easier because it fits right into that context. It's like, this, of course, is a thing that happens.
And it's interesting how early on those were just people trying to explain scientific phenomenon that they just didn't understand. And then that stuff kind of like stuck around. And if somebody invented it now, if somebody now was like, you look out of the corner of your eye and if you see a shadow, that's like Satan. If that was like a new concept, a lot of people would be like, what the hell are you talking about? That's insane. But because it's so old and it was established decades and decades ago, possibly hundreds of years ago, I don't even know, and it's ingrained into cultural
2000.
Yeah, ingrained into cultural society. Even people who would think that was bullshit if they heard it now as a new thing are just like, yeah, if you see a thing out of the corner of your eye, it's Satan. And Michelle Remembers became immensely popular at police departments across America, resulting in the funniest training video ever made.
Today it's my privilege to host this program on a little-known area in law enforcement, but important to every small community and every large city across our vast country. It's the area of satanic cults and how they impact our families, our children, and our communities. In satanic occultism, that which is good is bad, and that which is bad is good. And as you view this learning and educational tape, pay attention to notice the reverse of everything that is normal becoming abnormal. There are many crimes that are unsolved in our cities, and many of those crimes have ritualistic overtones, but they're hard to find, and it's difficult to find the depth of where these things
just
go
vamping,
and who
dude.
may have done them.
This motherfucker needs a
So today
script.
we hope to be able to shed some light on a dark, dark area, an area that has been taboo for so many years, that is also protected by the United States Constitution and the freedom of religion. That's why it's very difficult for us as law enforcement officers to really investigate. But the question really is, where do the freedoms end and our responsibilities begin for our communities?
That guy was finding every single word as he said it.
The best part of that, too, is the combination of him being a doomsayer and like, oh my God, the world is ending. Bad is good. Good is bad. Up is down. Cats and dogs living in fucking sin. But also, I got this real nice
But also,
on.
he's just an uncle.
Yeah, totally. That guy's like, y'all gonna go to the barbecue later?
Yeah, he like went to a barbecue and like saw like the mom of his daughter's friend and chit-chatted for a couple minutes and then went home and watched Matlock.
100%.
But he started off his day being like, Satan is real and he's coming for all of you.
Yeah. Also, maybe they should have not put that guy facing the sun. I'm sorry. But the squint on that guy was not Dirty Harry. It was, fuck my eyeballs.
Yeah, it was nearsighted Harry. Nearsighted Jonathan.
Nearsighted Jonathan.
It is worth jumping in to mention here, because earlier on you talked about how the accusations of abuse from against the Church of Satan caused the Church of Satan to come out and threaten to sue for libel. The Church of Satan is a real thing. Satan worshipers are real things. There absolutely were people who worship Satan. Satanists have been around for a very long time. There's a rich history to that. This is another place where kind of the reality blurs into the urban legend, because like what this guy is saying, like, well, you know, we can't stop these people from worshiping Satan because the Constitution says something about how you can worship whoever you want. You know, there's that technicality in there, whatever. But he's conflating these goth kids in a basement doing a ritual that is invariably the saddest thing you've ever seen with the fictional version of they are sacrificing infants by the dozen. It's totally fine to believe the first thing. It's when you start to confuse in your language, well, you agree that Satanists exist. It's like, yeah, but they don't sacrifice infants because even if they wanted to, there's no convenient way to do that. Like you live in an alternate reality where, you know, because some of these people in their recovered memories would say they saw 20 infants sacrificed on an altar. It's like, okay, if one infant went missing and people found its ritualistically dissected body, that would be international news for years after. One, the idea that so many babies are being murdered every single day in the United States that you could just lose 20 or 30 of them, you know, they're just snatching them out of the hospital. You know how it goes. It's like, no, they actually keep pretty close track of those things. It's actually hard to make off with even a single baby without people raising a stink about it. They will seamlessly in the first half of the sentence say something that's inarguably true. There are kids out there that worship Satan, mostly because it freaks out their parents and they're mad at their parents who are Christians. And it's fun. Everybody needs something therefore they are literally eating the flesh of infants in dark rituals. And then they will throw out some statistic like 20,000 children went missing last year. And the statistic is always including every single child who ran away from home for 4 hours and then came back home. They throw that into the number of children who go missing and then are found ritualistically cut in half is 0.
Yeah, most of the missing child statistics are runaways that are returned within like hours, or they were abducted by their own parents, like a dad who is bitter in a divorce or whatever.
And I bet there are people listening to this who are shocked to hear that, because you will go on Facebook and you will see them to this day, like the pro QAnon accounts still have an infographic. Last year, however many thousand children went missing in America. And they will imply that we don't know where these kids are. And that guy made a reference to that. Like, oh yeah, children just disappearing all the time. And they're not. That is a child being abducted by a stranger and murdered. As a crime, that is so rare that when it happens, we know that child's name. Like, that doesn't happen. That kids get kidnapped by family members. It's usually in custody disputes. Kids go missing, and most of the time it's because they just missed a bus and went to the friend's house. The parents panicked and called the cops, and then 3 hours later they found the kid. But that still goes in that statistic as child went missing. But even in the cases where children are abducted by a stranger, in almost every case, they are recovered unharmed later because it was just a crazy person, but they did not murder them, and they certainly did not sacrifice them on an altar. In other words, you have to forget about whether or not you believe in the supernatural. You have to believe in a world where children are just being murdered all the time to the point that it's just a thing. Like, oh yeah, every fifth child getting snatched off the street.
Yeah, and the thing about it is it's movie logic. It's like TV logic. Like I'm not a censorship, like the media like corrupts people or whatever type person at all by any stretch of the imagination. But there's something going on there where people have been fundamentally shaped in the way that they view reality by like the plots of movies, because it's movie logic. It only makes sense if it happened in a movie and then you don't think about the logistics of it. I made a video that went like kind of viral a couple of years ago where I was talking about the fact that in like weekly procedural detective shows, like Monk or Murder, She Wrote or any of these types of things, like J.B. Fletcher solves a murder every single week. And every season is 24 episodes, so she solves 24 murders a year. After like 2 years of solving 24 murders a year, she would be the most famous human being on the planet.
She's Sherlock Holmes level.
And yet in every episode, she's like butting into the investigation, and somebody's like, who's this mystery writer that thinks she knows? Like, no, if this was real life, after season 1, people will be like, J.B. Fletcher, no, solve this murder. Like, and it's the same thing where you just don't think about the logistics of the fact that, like, if whatever the statistic is, which I've kind of forgotten, I've looked at it before, but whatever the statistic that people throw around where it's like 300,000 children go missing a year in the United States, like, that would shape our society. It would be the only thing we talked about. If 300,000 children went missing every year, our whole world would become about that. Every news station would just be talking about the missing children. It's the only thing we would discuss culturally. It would be like that movie Weapons. Like, that's the whole thing of the movie Weapon, is all these children disappear one day, and then the entire town is just like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah, but in that film, it's the town that's obsessing over the 17 kids who went missing. In reality, if 17 kids went missing all in one night and a month later nobody found any of them, that would be headline news in Russia. That would be headline news in Japan. They would know about that in China. Like, they're in the movie Weapons, the people are having to like remember, well, you remember when those kids went missing. It's like, what are you talking about? There are network news satellite trucks on every corner covering this 24 hours a day. Parents across the world are refusing to let their kids out of the house because of this, because they're scared that this is going to, every single agent in the FBI would be here. They would be camped out. Every hotel room would be full of some sort of a federal law enforcement, because the whole world would be in a panic about these 17 kids. And you can say that, well, yeah, but it's just a movie. Of course, it's not real. No, parents do not let their children walk to school in the real world because they fear they will be snatched up and abducted and murdered, a crime that never happens. The way we parent children is based entirely on believing that child predators are roughly 1,000 times more common than they are in the real world. Now, to be clear, somewhere right now, not to bring down the mood, a child is being molested, but it's being done at the hands of a family member or somebody they know. Yeah. A child is being abducted somewhere. Yeah, it's being done by an ex-husband who got drunk and they've got a custody dispute, and so he grabbed the child and left the state. Like, that happens, but it happens in a way that's not fun to think about. So our movies and our pop culture makes it sound like, yeah, you could have, in John Wick, he shoots 77 people in one weekend. Yeah, in the real world, that would be the second deadliest day in New York history after 9/11. They would have a memorial to that event if that actually occurred. So, and you would say, well, yeah, but people know that's not real. They really don't. People picture crime, this kind of crime, exotic crime, stranger on stranger crime, as being exponentially more common than it is. So even after this panic has faded from the culture, that part of it lingers. The fear of strangers has never gone away.
Very well said, Jason. And also, I just want to ask you if you liked the way that I teed you up for that, because I've definitely seen the TikTok video that you made about weapons, and I knew that if I referenced that, you would definitely say that. So,
God damn it.
I mean, this is where the magic happens.
It's called synergy.
Yeah.
It's corporate synergy. All of our entertainment entities are all just, we're making millions off of this.
Yeah, the brand synergy happening right now is off the charts. Numerous high-profile cases emerged throughout the 1980s. We did a whole episode on the McMartin preschool trial, where teachers for a Southern California preschool were put on trial for abusing hundreds of children, using a tunnel to move kids from the school to a satanic altar. The trial went on for years despite zero credible evidence, including the fact no such tunnel beneath the school existed. There was also a prominent case in Bakersfield, California. In 1982, Becky McQuan accused her grandfather of sexual abuse, which was later confirmed by a doctor as actually having happened. Through coaching from her step-grandmother, Marianne Barber, who had a history of mental illness, Becky and her sister Dawn came to accuse their own parents of sexual abuse and being part of a sex ring. In case that was like confusingly worded, a grandfather abused his granddaughter, and then in order to like deflect blame from him, his wife tricked his grandchildren into instead accusing their own parents of having done it and not him, which was a very famous case in Bakersfield. Despite the children mentioning numerous crimes being committed, no evidence ever materialized. The McQuans, as well as other Bakersfield residents, Scott and Brenda Kniffen, who were also falsely accused of being part of the sex ring, went to trial and were found guilty. The 4 individuals received a combined 1,000-year prison sentence in 1984. It took until 1996 for the 2 couples to successfully appeal their convictions and get released, due in part to the Kniffen's sons recanting their accusations. However, Becky and Dawn never recanted their testimony and still believe in the false memories. Those were far from the only lives ruined, because during this time, anything and everything could have been infiltrated by Satan. And some of the biggest targets during this era were heavy metal bands, Dungeons and Dragons, and of all fucking things, the Care Bears.
This is so difficult to talk about this part of it, because if you ever have a podcast guest and the first thing they say is like, well, you can't believe what them kids are saying. If they, they ever accuse, they're lying. They're lying all the time. They're like, okay, just arrest that guy, and then we'll figure out later what he did. But in reality, this is why I have more sympathy for police officers than most people. Any crime involving children is a nightmare to investigate, because the kids, it goes both directions. The kids are terrified of accusing a loved one. The kids are scared to death of their parents going to prison. So if it's a parent who's abusing them, it is difficult to get the kid to ever say it, because they don't want to get the parent in trouble. But at the same time, if you get an interrogator who does not know what they're doing, as lots of people during the Satanic Panic did not know what they were doing, when talking to kids, the kids want to please you, and they're already scared to death that they're talking to a police officer, and the kids don't know. The kids think they're going to go to jail, right? Or that they're going to be in trouble. So if they sense that the police officer wants them to say a certain thing, they'll say it, and they'll throw in details. Kids love to do that. The kids love to tell stories. If you've ever talked to a kid and asked them what happened at school, sometimes they will just make up the wildest thing, that they were coming home and they saw an elephant, and the elephant chased them. It's people are natural storytellers, and kids who don't necessarily have a firm grasp on reality. If you don't have any physical evidence and you don't have any other witnesses, and all you've got is the kid telling the story, very good-hearted people will say, well, why would they lie about that? Believe the victim. Children, that's so unfair to the children, because you're putting them under incredible strain. You're putting the pressure of this case on their little shoulders, and they're kids. Their brains don't work yet. And this is one of the most frustrating things when trying to read any book about this era, because people did go to prison. And also there's cases where, not necessarily these, it's possible there was abuse, but it was the satanic angle that got added to it, and nobody knows where the real part stops and the rest of it begins. So it's possible that there were 2 injustices, first accusing maybe the wrong abuser, but because they got caught up in this, and there was this era when you could bring that stuff to a jury and they would go wild for it because they loved the ritualistic stuff and it's just so salacious. But it's possible that somebody else got away with abuse because this got conflated in the kid's mind. They added all of these other details, or the interrogator was adding things like, now did they take you into any kind of a room, maybe a basement somewhere? Did they? And was there, oh, they did. So was there, can you describe the furniture in the room? Was there any kind of was it like maybe a table made of stone, anything like that? Like, you can lead a kid down that path, So now you've corrupted what might be a real case against somebody else. It's terrible in every direction is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's a no-win scenario. It's the Kobayashi Maru of satanic child.
You can't just confidently eat an apple through it, though.
No, you really can't. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this dynamic pretty in depth in our Ray Bucky episode, because the Ray Bucky episode is like specifically about just that, which is like children being coerced into making up fake stories about a handful of people. Specifically, this guy that kind of put them in prison for several years, despite the fact that they didn't actually do anything. And the thing that we talked about there, not to just rehash what we already talked about in the episode, but I'd rather talk about it with you than this guy. But the idea that like it creates the Kobayashi Maru, right? It creates the impossible scenario where if there's a child saying that they've been abused and there's nobody around to have like witnessed it or whatever, all you have is the testimony of this child, and you should believe the child. But because of these situations like being coerced or given false memories by somebody who may or may not have been well-intentioned or even actually malevolent in their attempt at coercing the child, the waters get muddied to the point where all the things that you're talking about come into play, of the fact that children's minds are malleable and they will make up stories because they want to please adults and all these things. And then it just creates like a situation where it's a no-win scenario. You can't parse what you are supposed to do in that situation. And about something so dark and important that you do know the reality of the situation, it's like a horrifying existential nightmare that we frequently find ourselves in those scenarios.
In every parent's worst nightmare too, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like not only is it just every person, but then there's like another fear on top of that's the parent, then the societal. It's just like a compounding like, oh God, yeah, no thank you. I don't want any of it.
Jason Pargin, many of the listeners know who you are, but if they don't, I mean, we're really excited to have you on the show. Like I said, I think before, I've been following your writing since the early days of Cracked. I'm a huge fan of all of your books. I've read every single one of them, from the first John Dies at the End to the latest Zoe book, and the big Black Box of Doom book. That was the last book I read from you. But that being said, do you want to talk about yourself a little bit? Maybe plug anything that you're looking to plug recently?
Well, the most recent thing that came out was the book I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom, which does not include Satanism, but is very, very relevant to what we're talking about here today, because it is about the movement of information and of misinformation, and about just kind of how the brain works and how the brain interprets the world, and our tendency to want to believe what seems like terrible things, but why it's more comforting to believe the terrible thing rather than the real thing. But also, in the course of promoting this book over the last 2 years, the book is called I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom. Everyone inserts the word big into the title, including my agent, including people who work on the book. They will say there will be subject lines of emails, big box of doom or big black. The box is not very big. There's something mentally where I clearly should have made the title of the book.
So what you're saying is that when I flubbed the title just now, I was right and you are actually wrong.
I'm saying everyone flubs it in the same way, to the point that it's clear that should have been the title, because there's something where the brain prefers that phrasing, and I don't know what it is. People do seem to like it. Don't take my word for it. Search for the book and then read reviews from other readers. Not the ones that are clearly bots that I've paid to review the book positively, but the ones that seem real, that were not written by AI. Read those. Because in general, it's gotten a very positive reception. But yeah, and it just came out in paperback at the time we're recording this. I don't know when this goes up, but it presumably will still be out in paperback unless the book has been banned by then.
Yeah, well, I highly recommend that people check it out. I've read the book. I love the book. It is obviously a change of pace from the sort of mainline John Dies at the End books that you're most known for, and it's also is it a one-off? We have any sequels planned? Is this an exclusive?
No, this is a one-off.
Yeah, it's more of a one-off. It feels like more of a one-off than the John Dies at the End or Zoe books, but it's good. I would highly recommend checking it out. And also, I to editorialize a bit. I've thought about this a few times in prepping to have you as a guest on the show, but I find it kind of funny that like your first 3 or so books have like a very specific type of DNA to them, which is like, it's like regular people caught in the fucked up dysfunctional system that has been created to service the symbolic oligarchs, or celestial cosmic beings that sort of play with humanity like we're toys, and people just trying to make their way through that. And then there was a point somewhere where like you got on Twitter, and then all of your books became about how bad the internet is. And the black box of doom is like the pinnacle of that. I feel like you explore that in if you're reading this book, you're in the wrong universe. You explore that in like the last third of that book, and then big box or black box of doom feels like the coda to that third act of the fourth John Dies at the End book. Am I on the mark there at all?
It's the one subject I consider myself to be an expert in, because I've been an extremely online person since before most people had an internet connection at all. In 1996, I was on message boards and chat rooms, and it was like perfectly designed for my brain. Somebody who loves trivia, somebody who loves observing interactions from afar, but not necessarily being in the room for them. So whereas I always thought of myself as kind of an antisocial introvert and somebody who doesn't deal with face-to-face interaction very well, the internet was like tailor-made for me. So it has been bizarre to have spent the next 30 years after that watching my dysfunctional personality type just take over the world, where it seems like everybody is that now. Elon Musk clearly is that. He clearly cannot have a normal conversation in a room full of normal human beings. He has internet poisoning. So I don't want to make myself, seem like an expert or an academic in any subject, but having an internet poisoned brain is something I can speak, I think, with some authority about, because I've been living inside of that for as long as it has been a thing. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I got the sense of. That's what I've taken away from, I think, your last 3 books. The second and third Zoe book kind of go in that direction. John Dies at the End 4, and also this book. Also, it all seems like you're sort of shifting your meta in that direction. So if you want to experience a story about how the internet has fundamentally reshaped society, possibly for the worst, you should check out Jason's latest book. Do you want to talk about the new John Dies at the End book at all? I mean, I know it's like far off from publishing, but you just announced the title. Is that anything you want to discuss at all?
It won't be up for pre-order when this goes out, I doubt. So it doesn't. Just keep in mind, there is a 5th book coming. And if you follow me, my username is Jason K. Pargin on all of the social networks. I'm that on TikTok and on Facebook and Twitter and Blue Sky and Threads. And what are the other ones? Instagram. Christ, how many are there?
Too many.
All of the ones. I don't have WhatsApp, or there's a couple that I don't have. In general, though, you type that username.
Just go onto a social media site and search for his name and just see what happens.
You'll get me, or you'll get some AI bot that will immediately ask you for money with my face and probably my voice these days. But otherwise, no, I should be at the top of the search results. And early next year, early 2026 is when you'll hear about the next book. But for now, I'm still selling the last one.
Really quick before we get back to things, just while we're on this topic of authors and writing, and also you made that joke about paying bots to review your book. What's your take on this whole discourse that's happening right now on social media about authors interacting with reviews of their work? Have you seen that? Have you seen this thing where what's her name? I'm blanking on her name. She put out a book. Elise Myers. She put out a book, and then like somebody gave it a bad review on Blue Sky or Threads. And then she like commented on it and was like, I'm sorry you didn't like the book. I'll give you a refund. And then people were like, you can't do that. What's your take on that?
I think that there's an ecosystem of book fans who enjoy gossip about writers far more than they enjoy reading actual books. And I'm so scared of that world because I cannot hold up to that level of scrutiny or gossip or whatever. There was a time I just, would happily have gone in my youth if somebody had come onto a message board and complained about one of my books, I would have just made fun of them ruthlessly because I don't know, I didn't care. And I just thought it was funny, but there's a whole ecosystem of book talk and book Instagram, book whatever, book add whatever the name of the social network is to the end of it, where they just like to gossip about each other, and this author is mean, or this author is toxic, or this author ripped off this other author, or this author didn't pay their cover artist. It's all of the drama about the industry and about these people as individuals. And I don't know. I think once you've made yourself kind of the show versus the book, I don't know. But at the same time, this person, by getting embroiled in this tiny little controversy, has gotten word out on their book in a way that 100,000 authors out there would love to. Just this amount of engagement, they would kill for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they did it on purpose. I'm just saying that it still gets the title of the book out there. And then for every X number of people that hear that title and are mad at the author, one person is going to go look up the book and say, oh, this is a romantasy. I love that stuff. I'm going to buy it. And so I guarantee you they have seen their sales go up, not down, in the course of this controversy. It's the same thing every time one of them is accused of whatever, being a grifter or whatever you accuse people of these days. They sell books off of it, whether they intend to or not. So I don't know. I try not to directly interact with reviewers, mainly because I don't know, what am I supposed to say to them? I can't imagine like a famous author of the past, but then again, they absolutely did stuff like that. These are some of the most petty people of all time. Hemingway, they're always like bickering with other authors or with, some newspaper reviewers. And then they would like put that reviewer in their next book and have them get killed or something. I don't know. Authors are all very insecure weirdos.
Yeah, I never wade into that. I avoid it like the plague. Like whenever
that's just you. Like that's nothing to do with like authorial ethics. You aren't that guy. Like
yeah, to a certain extent, but it is though, because there are certain aspects of this book the book I did for Simon & Schuster, Forest Hills, Bootleg Society, where like that book, a certain type of person really liked it, and then another type of person really didn't. And so there's a lot of really weird, shitty reviews out there about like, oh, the book has a sad ending. Oh, it wasn't as like frothy and romantic as I thought it was going to. Oh, it's too dense. And like, this is about high school. High school should be a fun coming of age story. It shouldn't be like about sad, depressed kids
my God,
selling.
Dave, I have my Facebook set to private for a reason.
Right. But I just mean like, I very easily could have interacted with those posts. And I just can't do it because the clicks are so small that like, I make mostly graphic novels, Jason. So like it's like everything you're describing, but like even smaller and even more intense. So like these types of controversies happen constantly, but in the most pedantic, boring bullshit way where you say you don't like someone's review and then that person says you're an, exophobe, and then, it just spirals out and all of a sudden you're like the punching bag of Twitter for a week. And is any of it true? I don't know. Some of it probably is. And then you go to a convention and like everybody's being weird around you. And like, It's just so much easier to just not interact with any of that bullshit.
But keep in mind, I'm also, I'm a commentator on other people's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, I did a video about how I hated the Oppenheimer movie.
Mm-hmm.
If like Christopher Nolan came into the comments of that TikTok and was like, well, this is trash. What did you think it was going to be when you went into it?
You should have called your book Big Black Box of Doom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's clearly, it sounds better. It scans better. What were you thinking? Don't you have an editor to tell you those things? It'd be like weird. It's like, oh no, you're not. We're not in a conversation. I'm a viewer of your movie. We don't know each other. What do you? Why did you step out of the screen like the little girl in The Ring?
Yeah.
To confront me about what I said. You're not real. You exist in another universe. It's the same thing. It's like, I don't know, in theory, he could track me down and find me. I try not to punch down or make fun of like smaller creators or whatever, because I'm not trying to make their lives worse, but I freely make fun of bad movies or TV shows that I hated. And yeah, there are people who wrote for them that may follow me on there. They may be fans. It may have hurt their feelings, but that's separate. That's not, we don't know each other. We're not friends.
Yeah.
I don't care. And the type of books I write, the whole point of those books, the tone, everything is that when you read it, it's the knowledge that other people would hate this. Like, oh, but the thing I'm reading, it's weird. I bet a normal person would hate this book. That's part of the joy of it. So to find out that, oh, you've got some negative reviews on Goodreads because people didn't like the cursing or they didn't like whatever. It's like, well, yeah, it's a book for weirdos. I didn't write it for normal people. That's a normal person. That's a well-adjusted person. That's good they didn't like it. It means that they probably had a happy childhood.
Well, here's the thing. Keep talking your shit about Christopher Nolan. Keep posting your videos, because the thing is that we can track him down before he tracks you down. Just come out to LA. I know where he lives. Christopher Nolan lives behind UCB on Franklin Avenue. Like, I've been to his house multiple times, not into his house, but you're at UCB and you're doing a show and then you're like, want to go check out Christopher Nolan's house? And you go behind the theater and he lives back there and you can see into his house and he's got bamboo in his front yard and he has like a white van that has like a Batman logo on it or whatever. So we can get the jump on him before he gets you.
It's got to be so weird living out there among actual famous people and you just run into them.
Oh yeah.
It's like Hugh Jackman is in line at the hardware store with me. He's buying a screwdriver.
That's real. That's real. I live in a certain area where, like, on the street right here, like right outside of my house, there's this historic strip of shops that has been very famous for many decades. And they do this thing every Christmas called the Holiday in the Park, where they shut down the street and there's all kinds of vendors and food trucks and the shops do special things. And I was just telling Dave about this earlier, but we had dinner inside of this Methodist church that was serving chili. And we went in there and we got these chili dinners for myself, my wife, and my kids. And Shelley Long was just there. Like, she was just sitting in the Methodist church talking, and I was like, that's Shelley Long right there. And now, back to the show. Act 2. Care Bears? More like Despair Bears. In the 80s, anyone could be afflicted by the almighty power of Satan, or at least that's what corny PSAs wanted you to believe. Yes, parents were encouraged to call the cops on their teenagers for getting some bad grades and listening to Ozzy. It sounds stupid in hindsight, but there was a full-scale societal effort to stomp out any negative influence that could lead kids down the path of Satanism. Of course, a major target of the Satanic Panic became heavy metal music, which already scared any adult who was a dork. But the target on metal's back only grew deeper in the summer of 1984. 17-year-old Ricky Queso, who just so happened to be a self-proclaimed Satanist, murdered his friend Gary Lowers in the woods outside of Newport, New York, while he was high on mescaline. Being a fan of Ozzy Osbourne and Judas Priest, as well as wearing an AC/DC shirt at the time of the arrest, it didn't take long for heavy metal to receive the wrath of a country in hysteria. In 1985, the Parents Music Resource Center, spearheaded by Tipper Gore, wife of Al Gore, created a list of the so-called Filthy 15, a sampling of songs with the content related to sex, violence, drugs, and or the occult that would function as the template for increased regulation for how albums would be marketed. Some of the songs on the list included Def Leppard's High and Dry, Black Sabbath's Thrashed, and Twisted Sister's We're Not Gonna Take It. This led to a full congressional hearing where PMRC member Susan Baker took it upon herself to read dirty lyrics in a room full of politicians.
As Ellen Goodman states in her recent column, Rock Ratings, and I quote, "The outrageous edge of rock and roll has shifted its focus from Elvis's pelvis to the saw protruding from Blackie Lawless's codpiece on a Wasp album. Rock lyrics have turned from I can't get no satisfaction to I'm going to force you at gunpoint to eat me alive," end quote. The material we're concerned about cannot be compared with Louie Louie, Cole Porter, Billie Holiday, etc. Cole Porter's The Birds Do It, The Bees Do It can hardly be compared with Wasp, I F-U-C-K like a beast. There is a new element of vulgarity, violence, and brutality to women that is unprecedented. While a few outrageous recordings have always existed in the past, the proliferation of songs glorifying rape, sadomasochism, incest, the occult, and suicide by a growing number of bands illustrates this escalating trend that is alarming. Some have suggested that the records in question are only a minute element in this music. However, these records are not few and have sold millions of copies. Like Prince's Darling Nikki, about masturbation, sold over 10 million copies. Judas Priest, the one about forced oral sex at gunpoint, has sold over 2 million copies. Quiet Riot, Mental Health, has some songs about explicit sex, over 5 million copies. Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, which contains violence and brutality to women, over 2 million copies.
That had a little less of her just actually reading the lyrics than I was kind of hoping for, because that's one of my favorite subgenres of content is a super pious person from like the 1980s or 90s, like exasperatedly reading lyrics from a song. That wasn't quite what I was hoping for, but you gotta love it.
You gotta love it.
I really love. I mean,
I loved her green flowing plantation owner top.
Oh yeah, yeah. The funny thing is, she is just that lady from Donnie Darko.
I'm beginning to think that I'm beginning to question your commitment to Sparkle Motion.
That's just literally her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Side note, later on during the panic over gangsta rap, the genre of elderly white people reading lyrics in hearings, I think was probably even at a higher level.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
100%.
I love the footage of Charlton Heston reading the Body Count lyrics where he's like, die, 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 pig, die.
Yeah.
A charming little ditty. I love that footage so much. Twisted Sister's frontman Dee Snider famously testified in front of Congress to voice his opposition to such labels and how the PMRC intentionally misrepresented his lyrics.
In listening to Susan Baker's testimony, this is a perfect representation of what I was talking about earlier, about the part that I resent from that upbringing, because her calling out songs that were about sexual assault, that's fair. You could have a left-wing feminist calling out that same song, saying that if you've got a young teenage boy, yeah, that can affect his, the objectification of women. But that's where if you saw your son buying that album or listening to that song, that would be an opportunity to talk to him about, okay, do you know what you're listening to here? Like, do you get why do you find this exciting? Why do you find this interesting? Is it just because it's shocking and you know that I would hate it? Or what do you find interesting about this? Like having that conversation about what they're into and why they're into that. The way she would then weave that into, well, and then there was a Prince song about masturbation. Like, well, that's not the same thing. That's just a thing that people do. And then she would, and then say, well, and then there's songs about the occult and sacrificing babies or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, hold on. You've conflated a song about I saw a woman pleasuring herself versus a song saying, hey, you should, we sacrificed and ate this baby. Those are totally different conversations to have. One of them is plainly a fantasy It's somebody role playing. It's, it's a fictional account. The singer is not saying that he did that. It is a song about a guy who does that, because it's the exact same reason that Stephen King writes books about a clown that murders people. He's not saying he does it. It's a fictional story. It's a form of storytelling. If you had a kid listening to that, ideally you would talk to them and make it sure they understand what they're listening to. But the stuff they wanted to ban, they're just jamming together everything they find objectionable. Violence, okay. Sexualizing underage girls, that's fair. But also any reference to sex, period. And then also Satan worship. Those are totally different things that would require totally different conversations. And the rationale for banning one is not the same for banning another. So, for example, the big one in my childhood was KISS. We heard that KISS secretly stands for Knights in Satan's Service. I heard this from my friends. And I never, as a little kid, I never listened to a KISS song. I just saw photos of Gene Simmons with the fake blood running out of his mouth. I saw it on a flyer from church or something. They're saying that he, or the Ozzy Osbourne, that he bites the heads off of bats from the stage or whatever. Then finally, I distinctly remember hearing the song. It was the first music video they made without their makeup. And I watched this video because it's like, I've got to see who these guys are. These evil, like these Satan worshipers, this demonic force. And it was the song Lick It Up. And I remember watching it like, man, I'm like 9 years old. And even I can tell these guys are lame. Like this is the most disappointing thing I've seen in my life. I thought they were going to be like cannibalizing a person. And then you listen to their song, and it's like, I want to rock and roll all night and party every day. And like, oh, this is music for like 14-year-old boys. Okay. But where's the devil stuff? Where's the evil in this? Where's the violence? And it wasn't there. And here's the thing. If my pastor had given a sermon saying, look, they got a song called Catholic Schoolgirls Rule. So the sermon today is about if you are a teenage girl out there and a guy who looks like Gene Simmons is hitting on you, here's why you shouldn't have sex with him. It's going to be bad for you in your life. You shouldn't do that. That would be a good sermon. That's something a lot of girls need to hear, because a lot of them are going to make that mistake. When you layer on the fiction of they are sending out satanic messages to brainwash the youth into sacrificing babies, you've ruined the utility of what you're trying to do, even from just a common sense point of view. And also it's bad theology. Nothing you're talking about is in the Bible. The ability for music to brainwash children, like none of that is biblical. It was very frustrating to look back on what they were telling me about that, when there's stuff they could have talked about. Yeah, some of these songs maybe do kind of glorify suicide or glorify just having a very dark view of the world. Yeah, it's songs that if you got a 13-year-old boy listening to it, a good parent would talk to them about it. But that's not what these guys wanted to do. They wanted it banned. They wanted it made illegal. They wanted the albums pulled off the shelf.
What do you think your church congregation would have been more offended by? The idea that KISS was like a satanic cult, or the reality that they were just a bunch of chubby Jewish guys?
Well, that's the thing, is because it was such a deflating moment when you see them and it's like, oh, these are just like, these are not cool guys. I'm sorry. Even at age 10, I was like, these are not cool dudes. I can tell, I can sense it. There's something. I see why they had the theatrical makeup, because that stuff was cool. But looking back, it's like that was 70s glam rock. There was nothing dangerous about it, but they happily leaned into it, as did all of these bands. Motley Crue did it. Motley Crue, they would put a pentagram on stage, and they said, like the lead singer would say, yes, we did this because it's free publicity. It's instant headlines. Every band out there is trying to get the word out about the tour. And when you ban a certain type of content, this is a thing that, by the way, a lesson we still have not learned. When you go over the top trying to ban a certain type of content or a certain type of idea, it's just going to make it seem cool to young teenage boys, because teenage boys, just hormones make them rebellious, and they want to rebel from their parents. They want to break out and test boundaries and do all the things that their parents told them they couldn't do. So if you say, no, this music, as in her little speech she gave, it's like, this music has graphic sex and masturbation, and the fact that, you know, our children are listening to it. What teenage boy who watches that testimony is not going to immediately run out and buy that Prince album? It's like if somebody tried to denounce my books, you know, the John Dies at the End book, saying these books are far too scary. I heard a guy had a heart attack reading. It's like, that's not going to dissuade a horror fan from reading it. That's going to make them want to seek it out.
Listen, Deep Cuts listeners, Jason Pargin's John Dies at the End series is so scary that I heard a guy shit himself to death reading just one page of it. Don't ever read it. This is like obviously this larger conversation about these like religious zealots who are trying to create this narrative, but even drilled down into a while back, like a couple years ago, and I've already read the book It, so I've read the book multiple times, so it's, you know, it was the bell was already rung. But I saw a TikTok video where there was like a person maybe in their like early 20s, kind of like a younger Gen Z kid, who was like, basically he made a video where he had a copy of It, and it had all these little note tabs in it. And he had been like reading through this and making all this notes. And he was like, I've spent the last several months like reading this book and analyzing it. And don't read this book. Don't read this book. And, you know, he's of course talking about like, there's a lot of dicey stuff in that book. You know, everyone talks about the gangbang scene, the underage child gangbang scene, which it's rough. It's rough, but there's other stuff in there. You know, Stephen King has a tendency to like couch like weird racist stuff in like an attempt to be anti-racist, but like his version of being anti-racist is just having characters say the N-word a million times. And it's like, I feel like you're kind of doing something here. Like this is, there's something else going on here. But just seeing that video of this like kid being like, don't read this book, it's problematic, I wanted to go read it again.
Right, yeah.
It immediately made me want to go. And you're talking about teenagers. I'm 37 years old. And I was like, fuck you, bro. I'm going to go read this book a fourth time. Like.
No, but you've been to if you go to the grocery store in the hot sauce aisle, the hot sauces all have like a skull and crossbones on the label.
Yeah.
It's like jet fuel, whatever, you know, something, devil's piss. It's like, yeah, it's nobody who's into hot sauce is like, oh, what? Better avoid that. That sounds really spicy. It's like, no, that's the thing. I get off on the pain a little bit. It's spicy. They even use that word to talk about romance novels. So yeah, if you got a critic out there saying, well, you should not, this pornography is so hot, you couldn't handle it. You're going to get too aroused. It's too sexy for you. Your sensitive mind couldn't. It's like, that's the best promotion you could come up with. And yes, we still do it to this day. Pick your own examples in the comments. You can argue about people who have gone the other direction or whatever, but it's the same thing. If you try to make it forbidden by framing it as dangerous, you've told them this is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to listen to. And the thing is, when I went and sought out a lot of this music, it was just very bad. It's like, oh, this is not imaginative at all. Like their guitar player is pretty good, but I don't know. It's you just they came up with that label. This was the era when they came up with that parental advisory label. And I remember being in high school that I would not buy an album unless it had that label. If a new rap album came out and it did not have that parental explicit lyrics label on it, it's like, this is going to be lame pop. That label meant it's the real stuff. It's the hardcore stuff. It was like the seal of approval.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll take no Kiss slander, Jason. But yes, broadly, I agree with you.
No, again, Kiss, the theatrics, the presentation, the stage show, it is incredible. Like, they were great show people because they recognized, look, we are not sexy dudes. we can't do what these other bands do. So they leaned into the costume work and the pyrotechnics, and people loved it. But the thing they loved was not the danger of it. The thing they loved was not the deep, dark truth of the soul. It was party music. It was glam arena rock. And I don't know. And I never heard a pastor say, look, I know you think that this music is lighthearted and fun and you like the guitar. That is a great guitarist, I admit, but they do objectify women. They do kind of they objectify young women. By just saying that stuff, they couldn't just do that. They had to add this layer of fantasy onto it. That's the part that always bothered me.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is this idea of saying that Kiss are like satanic dark cult that's using satanic rituals and magic to corrupt the youth, is that, as we saw when they were unmasked, like the Kiss guys, like Paul Stanley, he's just me. He's just like he's a guitar nerd who loves theatrics. Like, he's just some guy who just like, what if we put makeup on? Like, it's like,
without the makeup on, he looks like a guy who works at a deli.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
He's just like, he just loves guitar and he wants to get dates. And he also loves like musical theater. And that's the guy that's like the satanic demon. Like, it's very funny.
Yeah.
Hey, kids out there, if you didn't know this, most musicians are nerds.
Yeah.
And a lot of the gangster rappers, they were nerds.
Yeah.
A lot of them were nerds from like very good schools where they were trained in a lot of different musical styles, and they developed a gangster persona because that's what was selling at the time, and you had to adapt. But they were nerds in their real life. They were guys who were obsessed with music and the knobs and all of this, the sampling and stuff. That's all highly technical. You kind of had to be a nerd to do that stuff, to do the production end. Yeah, it wasn't for tough guys. It was for nerds. But you have to put on a persona because people want you to live the life that you are presenting on stage. But no, most of them just nerds.
Yeah. I love the knobs. I'm definitely a knob fan myself. But heavy metal wasn't the only target. Dungeons & Dragons was also vilified during this time period. The fantasy role-playing game first came out in 1974 and soon became synonymous with nerds, like pocket protectors and all. However, given the game's use of wizards, demons, and magic, it was seen as satanic. That connection only grew with the 1979 disappearance of college student James Egbert, a fan of the game. Should have been your first clue that he wasn't into dark satanic stuff, with his last name being Egbert. Publications speculated that Egbert believed he became part of Dungeons & Dragons and had gone missing. In actuality, Egbert had attempted to take his own life but went to stay with a friend after due to academic and parental pressures. But his case inspired the book Mazes and Monsters, subsequently turned into a TV movie starring Tom Hanks as a college kid who became obsessed with a D&D-esque game. You think he's all right by the end, but when it seems like he's going to take his own life after all, his friends have to come to rescue him. Have you seen this movie, or at least like the ephemera around it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Any of the stuff that was about this era or making fun of it, I've been, because again, as I mentioned, as I kind of grew up, it was right around the time we were all looking back and realizing how silly all the stuff looked. So there was a period in the 90s where I was obsessed with the backlash to all of this. But everything I said about Kiss, you can just repeat it for Dungeons and Dragons. Because again, when I was 10 years old, I had heard that there was this weird game where people put on costumes and pretended to be demons, and then they would drink blood, and they became convinced that it was real, and they all committed suicide together because they thought they would get to see the demon they were summoning. And then I actually played D&D in high school. It's like, wow, this is too nerdy for me. And that is saying something. Like, I'm not sure that I'm not too cool to be doing this, which is not a thought I had ever had about any activity prior to that. Again, the gap between the thing they were, I'm beating a dead horse here. They ruined their own credibility on other subjects by playing up the danger of these incredibly harmless things. D&D is the most, I don't even want to say it's the most wholesome or innocent. It is the nerdiest thing you can do. It is the least, if you have a child, of all of the things, if they're a 16-year-old kid, of all of the things they can be doing on a weekend evening, D&D is the one where they are the least likely to be harmed or to have sex at all. It's like you would almost wish they were doing something else that was a little bit more dangerous than that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of multimillionaires who would disagree with you that Dungeons and Dragons is the nerdiest chick repellent possible. As we've seen a huge growth in these like really popular Dungeons and Dragons game shows or whatever. Those people, that nerdy basement thing they were doing when they were in high school paid off.
Yeah, no shit.
I think that in 2025, you can have a lot of sex as a D&D fan. I'm saying in the 80s, that was not true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
And I can document it. I will provide you evidence that was the case. Now we watch like Stranger Things, like, oh, those kids are kind of cool. They're all playing D&D. It's like, yeah, okay. That's nice now that I'm 50, that you think it's cool and that it's okay to be a nerd like this. It wasn't like that in the 80s. We were alone. We did not have the internet. Do you understand? We couldn't find out that there were millions of us out there. We thought it was just, we were on an island. It wasn't, this is like the golden era of being a nerd. It was not like that back then. It was terrible.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like you said, like they discredited themselves by like making a stink out of these things at all. And it's true. It's like it just shows if for anybody paying enough attention, it just shows how little that they actually knew about the thing. Because it's like if you really knew what this was, you wouldn't be saying this. We talked about this a little bit in the Ray Bucky episode. The idea that like it's like D&D was created by a guy named Gary. This is not some dark occult thing. This is something that like people who love Doctor Who created.
And the thing is, I do not doubt there were multiple D&D fans who did take their own lives. It's because it attracts people who, it's a personality type that the world was not friendly to back then. Like, I'm sorry. It's hard to be like a nerd or an outcast now. It's hard to be on the spectrum now. In the 80s, they didn't know what that was. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Like, I was not diagnosed with anything. I look back at the kids I went to school with, and it's like that kid was so clearly on the spectrum, and they never got tested. They did not have the terminology for that. They just got bullied every day because they were weird and they didn't know how to dress. They didn't know how to read facial expressions, things like that. So activities like this drew a certain type of person who has a very vibrant imagination, because they have a vibrant imagination because they spend a lot of time inside their own head because it's hard for them to relate to other people. So they have a very rich inner life. And so here's this game where you can take that imagination and it becomes a social activity. You can create this world for other people. And it's this thing where they're sitting there and you get to share your imagination with them. I don't doubt there were teenagers that got so into that also kind of wished that was their life all the time, because whenever they went to school, it wasn't like that. They didn't have friends. They couldn't do the stuff that other kids thought were cool. But the reason they took their lives was not because of D&D. They did it because they were born into a world that didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah, but it's culturally inconvenient. You see these young kids that are committing suicide, and it feels like from a top-down perspective that it's a variable that you can't control for. It's culturally inconvenient to just say like either A, this is just happening, it's just random tragedy, we have no way of accounting for this. It's just happening and it's just bleak and sad. Or B, actually acknowledging or becoming aware of the underlying psychological and social reasons for why these kids are taking their lives. It's much easier to be like, there's an evil demon cult that's murdering them.
I'll give you an example from very recently without getting off onto a tangent. A very public crime was committed by a guy who, in the aftermath, it came out that he had logged like 5,000 hours in some, like Team Fortress 2, some online shooter. And obviously some people are like, there you go. The game trained him to kill. It's like, no, he had no friends. Like, do you understand? He logged that many hours in a game because he had nothing outside of that room.
Yeah. Correlation does not equal causation.
The thing that led him down a path to do the terrible thing, it's like, it wasn't the game. It was the fact that he can't relate to people. All of this stuff stems from that. That's a symptom of it. So I don't know. I grew up as that type of kid. I look back and see how other kids like that were treated. I see how they've always been treated. I get worked up when talking about it because now, you know, like after, I'm going to go off on another tangent. After Columbine, the idea that the kids who did that were goths. And so suddenly there was all this like talking about goth kids and then bullying and all this. Like, they were not. One of those two kids was just a psychopath. The other one just went along with it. That's it. He was a born killer. He was violent. He was violent his whole life. It had nothing to do with any of that stuff. But there was this whole thing after that of like these goth kids. What are these goths? What is goth? Anyway, it's like they weren't even goths. You've been doing this for as long as time has existed, I guess, of the weird kids who have their own little subculture. You get so freaked out over it because kids who don't socialize very well tend to find each other. And you've got this little group of nerds and they find little nerd activities and people become obsessed with it and obsessed with the idea that they've got to be murderous somehow when these are statistically some of the least dangerous people in the world. I love to joke about how nerdy we were, but I'm trying to emphasize how gross it is to play them up as killers because we were the opposite of that. We were the least dangerous people you were ever going to meet.
But before we move on to the rest of this, we don't have to look too in depth into this, but I wanted to at least talk about this. Are you familiar with this, Jason? Are you familiar with Chick Tracks? Jack Chick,
oh yes,
the evangelical. Yeah, I mean, I assumed you were.
Oh yes,
I've seen and read many of them. It's a bit of a cultural fascination of mine, but on the subject, I think his magnum opus is this Chick track he did about Dungeons and Dragons, which I wish we could sit here and line by line go through this and do a dramatic reading where you played the main character, Jason, but we don't need to spend the time doing that. But I do want to just comment on the fact that, like, number one, objectively, this is just a very well rendered and well told story. Like, it's genuinely compelling. I mean, I've seen the Masons and Monsters movie. It's just kind of cheesy. It's like a movie of the week thing. This is compelling enough to be freaky, and I could see people reading this and genuinely being like, "Oh my God! Like, they're dying. They're taking our children." Like, this is compelling propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, the delta between his ability to actually draw and the fucking cuckoo pants shit that he uses it for is just so fascinating to me.
Yeah,
I love his work. Completely ironically, obviously.
Yeah.
If any listeners out there, tell them how to easily find this because it is well worth looking up. And actually, if you're not familiar with Jack Chick tracks or don't even know what we were talking about, it's Jack and then Chick, Chick is the guy's name. But these are all over the internet. They're very easy to find. But the one on Dungeons and Dragons, is there a specific title of this strip?
It does have a title, but it's Dark Dungeons.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. And I'm well familiar. I could probably recite a lot of this from memory. I've seen this many times. But no, it's a look into a subculture because you're going to ask yourself, the listeners are, well, did Jack Chick believe this? I think so. I think so. Or he believed that this was the type of thing that was going on, I think. I don't think he was running a scam. I think he thought this is how the world worked, but it's such a skewed view of what kind of danger teenagers face. Because, to be very clear, teenagers face lots of dangers. There is substance abuse and abuse by parents and suicide and depression. There's lots of things. None of it is this.
For the listener at home, if you're not watching the video version and you've never heard of this, basically it's a comic strip from this notorious evangelical cartoonist which is a story about a group of friends, or like two friends, who start playing in a Dungeons and Dragons group with some older people, some older teenagers, and then like an adult woman who's like the dungeon master, which is hilarious. The idea that like
he's so progressive.
You'd be playing Dungeons and Dragons and there would just be like a hot lady who was your dungeon master. Like that's a hilarious idea. If only.
That would have been life-changing for me in high school.
Yeah.
If I'd gotten there and there'd been like a hot lady doing it, I'd be like,
yeah.
Yes.
But one of the friends kind of like gets freaked out, kind of spooked by how creepy everybody's being. And so she kind of like retreats from it, but the other friend gets really into it. And then it turns out that it's like a satanic cult, and they let her, they help her to get like magic powers from Satan, essentially, where she can like move objects and things like that. And then the friend grows increasingly concerned about her, and then she kind of disappears. She stops coming to school. They want to know what's wrong with her, and then ultimately she goes to her house to try to check on her, and she's hung herself from her ceiling fan in her room. And it's a genuinely heartbreaking story. Like it like I said, it's well rendered and told.
Well done. Yeah, it's well done.
But it's also just supremely silly for many reasons if you actually knew anything about these things. But what was, Jason, what was your like first exposure to those? Because the reason why I brought it up is because, you know, those were a little bit before our time, because they were made in the 1980s, a little bit before we were born. But actually, my first exposure to them was not just seeing them on the internet, like I think a lot of people did, because they kind of became like a little bit of a meme, in the 2000s. My exposure to them was actually in real life, actually experiencing them in the way that they were intended to be experienced, which is that when I was in high school, there was like a hangout place for kids, and in this hangout place where you'd go and hang out with kids in the center, and you would go to the movie theater and eat at restaurants and stuff like that, there was a bookstore that you would often with your friends just go in and peruse the books. And one time I was in this bookstore, I think it was called Logos, and I was looking at a copy of Fellowship of the Ring. And in this bookstore, in the fantasy section with the Lord of the Rings books, somebody had put chick tracts in the books, like printed copies of these books. And this is where I actually organically experienced these. I found the Dark Dungeon one.
Jack Chick saved your life.
Yeah,
basically.
he did. And from that moment on, I was a changed person. But I found that one, and I found the one about how being gay is evil, where there's a gay couple, and they're speaking at a school, and then there's like a demon hovering above them with like puppet strings or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, was that, did you learn about them on the internet years later, or did you actually see them in person when they came out, sort of thing?
Oh, no, I saw them on paper, because they would leave them at like laundromats. There'd just be a stack of them. Usually they're like tri-folded flyers. And they were just around. I don't think they ever like handed them out at church, but they were just out in the world. I've not looked into how he distributed them. And I think also they appeared in like Christian publications. I seem to remember like my grandma having like these evangelical magazines or whatever, and there would just be a chick track like printed as it, it probably was syndicated somehow. The guy had to be making money off of it some way. I actually don't know what his business model was.
Yeah, I have no idea either. I've often wondered that. I'm like, how the fuck did he afford to do this?
He's just a true believer.
But I think like these days, people from outside that subculture will look at that and be like, wow, what a wild, crazy artifact this is. And it's like, no, there was tons of stuff like that. Like in my church, like there were lots of publications. There were movies we would watch. There were, the VHS tapes about the rapture. We listened to this one recorded lecture about backward masking in music, how they would hide backward satanic messages or subliminal messages in music. That was a big thing. There was tons of the Jack chick tracts were not the weirdest thing I saw by a long shot. It was just that we were immersed in media like that. And half the country still is, by the way. There's still plenty of evangelical Christians. It's now like the largest sect of Christianity that's still left, that still persists. And this stuff, a version of this stuff is just ubiquitous.
Even if heavy metal and D&D seem like niche topics to target, no pop cultural institution was safe from accusations of forcing satanic beliefs onto children. In 1986, Phil Phillips published Turmoil in the Toy Box, a book about how children's cartoons and toys were teaching kids about the occult. Phillips sat down for a 90-minute interview basically dissecting everything pop cultural at the time, from Scooby-Doo to Thundercats, and how they were all just propaganda for Satanists. Cartoons may have gotten the brunt of evangelical Christians' wrath, but if there was one form of media driving during this time, it was daytime talk shows. Shows like Donahue and Sally Jesse Raphael waded into the satanic waters, often speaking with women who, like Michelle Smith, remembered quote-unquote memories of being abused by Satanists. Geraldo Rivera would host a 3-hour special in 1988 all about the dangers of Satanism. During one part, he asked a cop about whether Satan was involved in a particular murder case, and when he doesn't give the answer he wants, he quickly moves on.
Now, I watched that one air when it aired live. Like, we sat down and watched it as a family, but by this point, I would have been about 13, and I remember watching the Geraldo special, and we were laughing at it. Because by this point, it was clear he was being... Like, he would see there's a moment in that special when he sees pentagrams that have been painted on a wall or something. And he kind of freaks out. And it's like, no, by this point in the cycle, teenagers had learned that if you paint a pentagram on a wall, you'll instantly get on the news. So it's like, well, of course they did it. It's instant attention. You, Geraldo, are giving them the attention they're seeking right now. But this is a key part of it, because this you'll still see today, that when you have a media ecosystem that is about covering a phenomenon like this, they have to keep coming up with stuff. So when you're asking, because I think some listeners are very confused, like, how do they find Satanism in the Smurfs or in the Cabbage Patch Kids? Right? It's like, no, you got to understand, they had to keep cranking out books. They had to keep cranking out like the video cassette series. If they had a radio show, they've got to have an idea for that show that week. So if your whole thing is Satanists have infiltrated our media ecosystem, you got to keep coming up with stuff. It's the same thing you see it today. It's like, if your beat is discovering whatever, something you've decided has taken over the culture, you got to keep finding it. So you eventually you start running out of ideas. And so the heavy metal music, where they are putting a pentagram on stage because they're now doing it for the free publicity. Well, you've already talked about that. You need something new. You got to keep it fresh. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. The Smurfs don't seem to have Jesus in their lives. And if you think about it, that's kind of satanic if you're not a Christian and they don't have Christ. So it's if you think about it, that's also Satan. Sure.
Yeah, I think by the time we were old enough to be sort of cognizant in the early 90s, we had kind of gotten to that jumping of the shark moment, like that season 9 of Scrubs. Like, we've run out of ideas and now everybody's just kind of a caricature of their former selves. We were like in that period, because like all of the stuff we're talking about that's more in like the mid to late 80s is very absurd and very goofy, but it's also like it feels authentically like this dark, satanic, spooky stuff. And it's like, pentagrams and Dungeons and Dragons as demons and all these things, and like, repressed memories of child trafficking rings and all this stuff. But then by the early 90s, I think they had thoroughly gotten to that out of ideas point that you were talking about, to the point where we get to this particularly silly period, the waning years of the Satanic Panic, where they're just like, Ninja Turtles are demons.
Power Rangers are so evil.
So yeah, we got the very goofy version of this when we were kids, where by that time everybody had developed enough media literacy about this topic to where it was like the last vestigial death rattles of the movement, but most everybody was just like you guys are fucking clowns. Like, what are you talking about? Pokemon are demons? Like, what? Like, everybody had kind of just gotten wise enough to be like, you guys are ridiculous. This is a joke. But they were still trying. They were trying to make Harry Potter satanic and the Ninja Turtles and all this shit. We were there for that. I told Dave on that Ray Bucky episode, but when I was a kid in the 90s, one time my parents had befriended the people who ran this small independent church. And so they were coming over to our house and hanging out with my parents, and then their kids would come over, and we were sort of like friends with them by proxy. And then one day they were going to come over and hang out with us. Like, for the first time, their mom was going to leave them at our house, and we were going to hang out for the day. And they got to our house and they came into our room, and the mom, the woman who ran this church, she saw that I had a Pokemon poster and like Pokemon bed sheets. And she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, they can't stay here." And like, she took the kids and left, and we like never saw them again. That's where we were in the whenever we were kids. That was the period we were in.
Well, and there was a subculture of people that were burning copies of Harry Potter. That would have been in 1997, I believe. And that was a period where overwhelmingly the culture was just laughing at them. Where if that book series had come out about 10 or 11 years earlier in the mid 80s, there would have been a much more popular, you would have seen a lot of churches banning it, a lot of burnings, a lot of demonstrations. Whereas by 1997, that people were just, it was a sideshow. You know, again, there's always like a subculture that persists that are probably still doing it to this day. But by that point, it had jumped the shark, as the kids used to say.
Yeah. And now you see those exact same type of people who would have been participating in those book burnings walking around Universal Studios in robes and shit and being like, Engardia Leviosa, oh, the little thing works or whatever. Eventually, the Satanic Panic just sort of fizzled out. New evidence debunked many of the claims coming from women who said they were used as part of ritualistic satanic abuse. The idea of Satan lurking behind every corner was a joke. People shifted focus to being scared of violent video games, and in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, people were more concerned about terrorists than the devil. And it's easy to look back at all the ridiculousness of the time period and say, boy, everyone sure was stupid back then. We can laugh at someone calling the Smurfs satanic, but a lot of people had their lives ruined because of all this. Innocent people spent years in jail and were labeled child molesters and baby eaters. The women who came forward with these allegations, including Michelle Smith, were ultimately victims, believing they endured such horrific abuse when in actuality it was all false memories. Like most other moral panics throughout history, the Satanic Panic was a response to a changing world.
So it fizzled out, but it was replaced by, in the 90s, what they call the NWO conspiracy theory. This was where on right-wing talk radio, they would talk about how the United Nations and other forces are secretly trying to not indoctrinate kids into Satanism, although there was some of that, but it was more like the communists are trying to indoctrinate your kids into secular humanism, and there's a secret plan to lower the world's population. And then that seamlessly morphed into Pizzagate, and that seamlessly morphed into QAnon and into whatever it is today. And then prior to the Satanic Panic, you had the Red Scare. I believe there's always one of these out there. And it's so ubiquitous across cultures that there's always a thing like this that I'm started to wonder if societies don't require something like this to be going on at all times, that there's got to be like this place people can put their anxiety, but it's a safe place to put it because it's not real. And on some level, maybe they know, but you know, you mentioned in the intro, going back, hundreds of years to witch hunts, things like that. There's always a witch hunt going on somewhere. And I don't know if this is unique to Western societies. I'm not an expert, but it's hard to find an era when there's not something like this, that there's not a subculture that's something like this, that claims that there's a dark force out here doing something to the children and the women and so on.
Yeah, a cultural boogeyman, a cultural other that people can kind of unite around. Yeah, I mean, from what we've kind of seen culturally for the last several hundred years, if not required, at least it just at least seems like woven into our DNA in a very in a very remarkable way. And, you know, yeah, whether or not there's a way of just like climbing out of that, like escaping the matrix, so to speak, I don't know. But
I don't think there is.
Yeah.
I think it's only I think it's exacerbated by certain cultural tides and shifts, and I don't know that algorithmic distribution of those ideas help, but I don't think that's going away. I think that's hardwired into our lizard brains.
In general, you want to believe that evil is something different than the thing you have inside you. You want to think that it looks like something very alien and exotic. It's not like the stuff you find inside your own brain. It's not like the selfishness and the bursts of anger and the lust, all the stuff that you have. It's like, no, evil it's this different thing. It's not something that exists in me. It's a force out there that it's alien and weird and strange, and you want it to be strange because you want to reassure yourself that couldn't be me, when in reality, most of the murders in the world are just spur of the moment and something somebody did in a burst of anger and an argument, or they were drunk or they were jealous or whatever. And it's like, well, that can't be what most evil is, because I've got that stuff. I've lost control of my anger before. I've been so jealous that I was out of my mind. I've done things that I wasn't really in control of myself. But surely the evil in the world's not just that, only cranked up a little bit, because that makes it sound like I could do evil one day. But if you reassure me that evil is this weird, exotic thing that I can't imagine living my life like that, I can't imagine doing a ritual or sacrificing a baby, something that doesn't even fit into my imagination very well, then it's reassuring. So you prefer to believe that this is going on out there, because if evil is just this very ordinary thing, then it's like, well, hell, that makes it sound like I could be evil in some ways. And that can't be true.
Yeah, and I think you've talked about this a few times in like random videos that I've seen from you, or maybe just in your writing. It's, you know, a blur of like where, like the source or whatever. But this idea that these types of behaviors and these types of movements are cyclical, and it's hard to get the scope of that. We talked about this in the beginning of the episode, so I'm kind of bookending it. But this idea that these types of tendencies have always existed, but it's really hard to get a sense of it because the human being's lifespan is too short to like understand the scope of time that like really puts things into context. But if you get to a certain age, you start to like notice like, oh, things are starting to start over a little bit. And I see that this is the thing that was happening when I was younger, and now it's happening again. And I mean, personally, I think I'm like starting to get right to that age where I am starting to see that a little bit. Dave, not as much, because he just doesn't have a memory. He can't remember anything that happened yesterday. But me, that was what's too far for you. We talk about it all the time.
I know,
but
it's true. I got nothing. It's true.
But so I've heard you talk about that. So that being said, what is your reflection on? Because certainly, while I agree broadly with this idea that things are cyclical and we're just seeing like the repetition of trends and movements that have happened before, you know, multiple times in the past. But what is your reflection on? Certainly, things are different in a way, because we are in a version of society that is unlike any version of society in the past, given the vast global connection of the internet and the ability to both find an infinite amount of information at any given time, but also to create and disseminate false information at an infinite scale that is almost unmanageable. What is your reflection on like how the internet has changed or possibly amplified that?
It's stuff that used to take decades to spread can now spread in days. A lot of these conspiracy theories, once upon a time, it took years for it to percolate out through people, in word of mouth and in people having meetings, or they listen to a particular niche radio show, where now something can go viral, like literally overnight, like this, and so something like QAnon can go from a 4chan hoax to storming the Capitol in like 2 years. And these days that's the speed at which it happens, but stuff also burns out very quickly. I'm not hopeless about this kind of thing. Many millions of people who wholeheartedly believed in the Satanic Panic a few years later realized they were being silly and that it wasn't true. That did fizzle out. These things, bad things don't just keep going on. People do realize they were wrong and they quietly walk away, or they disavow it, or they make fun of it. It happens all the time. And so the next thing will rise up. People will fall for it because you are susceptible to this kind of thing. And I think for a show like this to be useful to people, it's not to make fun of these gullible rednecks who fell for this weird conspiracy theory. It's asking, am I currently participating in something like this, where someone has crafted a version of reality that specifically touches on my values and hits me on an emotional place that maybe is making me turn off my brain a little bit because I so badly want to believe that people are worse than they are? Is there some version of that you have, whoever you are in your life? I don't know your beliefs. That's what's useful, that you can stop and say, okay, is somebody else using my own sense of morality against me? Is somebody else using my own fear of children's safety against me in the same way these people were used, where it's like, they're trying to stoke these fears. And am I allowing myself to believe that people are worse than they are? Because on some level, I want to believe that because it makes me look better in comparison to that. If you believe the world is full of monsters, then to see yourself as a hero, you just got to roll out of bed in the morning. Just the fact that you didn't murder a baby today, it's like, see, I'm not like all these other people that would do that. It's like, well, no, in reality, they wouldn't. But no, it's so, yeah, that's the one thing I would reflect on. It's you're being bombarded by attempts at doing this every day because it's profitable. This is the part that we kind of, we touched on. A lot of people made a lot of money off the Satanic Panic. A lot of people sold a lot of books and booked a lot of speaking engagements. They got a lot of work off of it. That grift has not gone away. It will still be here 1,000 years from now. It's the oldest profession, second oldest.
Well, that being said, speaking of oldest professions, I don't know what the joke I was trying to go for there. Dave, do you have any final thoughts on the Satanic Panic?
My final thoughts are that it's really sad that this happened and that all these like normal people got sucked up into it. I think it's scary that it happens now, like Jason said, on a faster, more repeated timeline. And also that we're still dealing with the same sort of weird religious indoctrination and conservative kind of bizarre, don't live your life now because you're going to have a life after your actual life that you need to kind of like gain entrance to. All of those concepts are extremely existentially horrifying to me, and it doesn't make sense to me that so many people are involved in those pursuits. And this story is one of 5,000 examples of why it is concerning to my core that so much of our culture is built around this.
Jason, other than what you so eloquently put earlier, do you have any final thoughts about the Satanic Panic?
No, just like I said, keep an eye out for it in your real life. There are tiny little versions of this everywhere. It doesn't even have to be some national thing. In your friend group, there can be some version of this where you're making assumptions about people, and it's something that is ugly, or that you are, I don't know, you can ask yourself, do I want to believe this a little too much? A good test, as has been said by other people, if you hear that some group of people, whoever it is, some subculture or another shift at your job or whatever, if you hear something awful about them and then you find out that it's not true, do you find yourself wishing it was true? If so, you've started going down a dark path. Or do you find yourself disappointed that the guy you thought was, whatever, was abusing his wife wasn't, that it was just an ugly rumor? Do you find yourself wishing you could go back to thinking that about him? It's like, okay, stop and interrogate that emotion in yourself. Why did you want to believe the ugly thing? And why do you find it so comforting and exciting to believe the worst about people around you? Because that will make you a worse person over the long run. Some of the worst people you know, their primary sin is just they think the world is full of monsters. That's why they act the way they do. That's like, I'm going to do this because otherwise they will do it to me.
Yeah, my final thoughts mostly echo that. I think, the big thing, as I mentioned before, Jason, that something that you don't have context for is that we did this 12-hour, 6-part series on QAnon. And in many ways, it was like, I saw that there was like a vacuum where nobody had really, there was a lot of content and a lot of media about QAnon that were like focused on different specific questions, like, who is Q? Like that was the HBO documentary, was who is Q, which I'm less interested in than like the question of why do people follow this thing? What happened to these people's lives that led them to the path where this is the thing that they chose to put their focus on. And so we did this series, which I thought was really the only thing that was like talking about the QAnon movement in this way. But it was also like, in another way, me trying to like exercise the demons of seeing this movement grow and seeing these things and being like really frustrated by them and really finding it difficult to cope with the way that it felt like misinformation in a post-truth society was just like flailing out of control and becoming larger than anybody could ever possibly get a handle on. And then it was like the feeling of like a genie being let out of a bottle, forever. And it was like a way of sort of exercising that demon. And the thing that I kind of learned over the course of all the research and all the interviews that we conducted and all of the work that we did on that series was that, instead of like focusing on that part of it, of the frustration and the feelings of like lack of power over what was spiraling out of control that I was kind of perceiving, the thing that I really took away from it was kind of in line with that, which is like, rather than focusing on how frustrating and how existentially horrifying this might be, focus on looking at it as a way of self-reflecting and also having empathy for other people, looking at how you could possibly be fooled by certain things, or how you could be, fall down rabbit holes because of a particular set of beliefs that you have. And it might not be the specific QAnon thing, but there might certainly be something else that you could similarly be radicalized by in that way. Looking at these people, recognizing that they're human beings that also went down a bad path like you possibly could, and maybe even have in some ways, and using that, like I said, as a way of empathizing with them and recognizing that they aren't just like a bunch of like fucking idiots who are, have been bamboozled, but they're also human beings going through a real struggle that just kind of need help and have been led astray by a few bad actors. But also looking at it and recognizing that it's something that you should look at as a way of self-reflecting and recognizing when those things might be affecting you. And that's the best advice I can give anybody after doing that series, is rather than getting hung up on how frustrating it is, instead look at ways that you can control the things that you are capable of controlling, which is yourself, essentially, and your friends and family. And when people are falling down these rabbit holes, provide a shoulder to cry on, or an ear to talk to, or just go for a walk with your radicalized uncle, or whatever it is. That was the main takeaway that I took from there, and I would echo those sentiments here as well.
Well, on that note, I'm Dave Baker.
I'm Andrew Price.
And I'm Jason Pargin.
This has been Deep Cuts. If you'd like to find me online, you can do so at heydavebaker.com. You can find my book, Married to Moorhawk or Halloween Boy, there. Jason, where can people find you on the internet?
I am Jason K. Pargin on TikTok and Reels and Instagram and Twitter and all the Twitter clones. The most recent book is called I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom. It is available on paperback anywhere you get books, except for like grocery stores and stuff. Bookstores, really.
Andrew, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find my book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, by going to dapricerights.com. It's a comic about a robot detective in the future who's solving crimes and dealing with existential ennui. You can also follow us on social media by going to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, so on and so forth, and searching for Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join our Facebook group, the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. You can join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord, where we hang out, we talk about the show, we make memes, so on and so forth. You can also back us on Patreon, back the boys, pump the page, get the goods by going to bit.ly/deepcutspatreon, where you can, for $5 a month, be a junior sleuth, and you can get ad-free episodes of the show, as well as a shout-out in every episode. You can also, for $6 a month, get access to that, plus a tier of bonus content, plus merch discounts, and a few other cool things. And then for $10 a month, you can become a senior sleuth, where you get all of that, plus a second tier of bonus content, plus more discounts on merch, plus access to our monthly live stream episode, and more goodies. So go to bit.ly/deepcutsdiscord, Deep Cuts Patreon, and back the boys. And also check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@mysterytreehouse, where we do long-form explainer videos.